She was not born to fit in. She was born to disturb the slumber of the world. Her name was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, and whether you admire her, fear her, or dismiss her entirely, you cannot ignore her. In a world that teaches us to be silent, obedient, and numb to our deeper knowing, she was a voice that refused to whisper, a woman who did not beg to be understood, only to speak the truth as it burned through her veins. But what if I told you that her life was not just controversial? It was dangerous, not because she held power in the traditional sense, but because she possessed something far more threatening: memory, a memory of who we truly are, before the masks, before the conditioning, before the illusions of this world, a memory of the origin flame, the ancient truth that burns behind all religions, philosophies, and esoteric traditions. She remembered, and she tried to make us remember too. But the world does not reward such memory. It punishes it. So they attacked her. They laughed at her. They called her insane. They labeled her a fraud, a charlatan, a liar, not because they proved her wrong, but because they could not silence the ripple she created in the soul of humanity. She was born in 1831 in Ukraine, then part of the Russian Empire, to a noble family, surrounded by luxury, structure, and expectation. But none of that could contain her. From the earliest years, she displayed gifts that unnerved everyone around her: premonitions, psychic visions, conversations with invisible presences, a magnetism that defied explanation. She would later call these beings the Mahatmas, the masters of wisdom, but as a child, she didn't name them. She simply listened, and that's where the story begins. Not with fame, not with books or societies, but with a girl who remembered something the world had forgotten. Imagine being born into a world of rigid religion, stifling social norms and colonial arrogance, while harboring a soul that belonged to the stars. That was Helena. She would not be married off. She would not play the role of quiet wife. She fled her arranged marriage at 17 and began a journey that would span continents, languages, and lifetimes, not as a tourist or an adventurer, but as a seeker, a rebel, a vessel for transmission. She traveled to Egypt, India, Tibet, the Americas. She claimed to have trained with secret brotherhoods in the Himalayas, initiated into mysteries older than civilization itself. She claimed to have access to the Akashic records, the ethereal library of all knowledge, past and future. She spoke of karma before the West even knew what it meant. She talked of reincarnation, energetic bodies, planetary cycles, and cosmic laws long before these became household terms in spiritual circles. But she didn't just speak, she wrote. Her books, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, were not casual spiritual texts. They were wild storms of esoteric knowledge, blending Hinduism, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and lost Atlantean wisdom into something terrifyingly coherent. They were not meant to be easy. They were meant to break you open. She wrote of the hidden architecture of the cosmos, of the divine laws that shape the seen and unseen worlds. She claimed that humanity is not a product of sin or accident, but a fragment of the absolute, divine consciousness descending into form, forgetting itself, and struggling to awaken again. And for saying that, they tried to erase her. But ask yourself this: why would so many powerful forces, religious, academic, scientific, unite in their condemnation of one woman? Why was she portrayed as dangerous, unstable, even diabolical? Why did they focus not on what she said, but on the fact that she dared to say it? The answer is simple: because she reminded us of something terrifying to those who rely on our obedience, that the divine is not outside of us, it is within. That truth is not found in dogma, but in the silence between thoughts. That spiritual power is not reserved for priests or prophets, but is the birthright of every soul. That the veil is thin, that this world is not all there is, and that there are forces, both luminous and dark, guiding and misleading us in equal measure. She challenged the very foundation of Western materialism. She mocked blind faith and scientific arrogance alike. She exposed the colonial mentality that sought to strip indigenous and Eastern knowledge of its dignity. She returned wisdom to its source, not in books or rituals, but in the lived experience of consciousness itself. And for that, they called her a threat. But let me ask you this: what if the world isn't what you've been told? What if your life, your thoughts, your struggles, your identity, are being shaped by invisible currents older than civilization? What if your soul is not broken, but buried? What if the world isn't lacking magic, but simply drenched in a spell of forgetting? Blavatsky believed that humanity is in a coma, a spiritual sleepwalking state, and that only by confronting the great truths of existence, the truths buried in ancient symbols, sacred texts, and mystical experience, can we awaken, not gently, not gradually, but violently, as if ripped from a dream that had become too comfortable. Her life was not perfect. She was not a saint. She was volatile, sarcastic, fiercely independent, but maybe that's why she succeeded. Maybe that's why her voice still echoes, because she refused to betray her message for the sake of acceptance. She didn't want followers. She wanted rememberers. And now here you are, listening, curious, maybe even skeptical, but something in you knows there is more than what you've been taught, more than what the world offers, more than the hollow echo of modern spirituality. This series is not just about Helena Blavatsky the woman. It's about the message behind the myth, the fire behind the words, the call behind the controversy. In the chapters that follow, we will walk with her, not to worship but to understand. We will explore her life, her teachings, her enemies, and her legacy. We will dive into the secret doctrine, the Mahatmas, the hidden laws of the universe, and the war for the human soul. But most of all, we will remember, because that is what this journey is about. Not learning, not believing, but remembering. So if you've ever felt like this world isn't the whole story, if you've ever sensed a silence behind the noise, a light behind the darkness, a presence behind the illusion, then this is for you. Welcome to the forbidden story of Helena Blavatsky, and welcome back to yourself. Before she became the voice of a forbidden wisdom, before she wrote the books that would divide the spiritual world forever, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was just a child, but not a child like the others. She was born in 1831 in Yekaterinoslav, a city in the Russian Empire under a sky heavy with silence. Her family was noble, aristocratic, military men, intellectuals, poets. Her bloodline was stitched with privilege, but her soul belonged to something far older than empires. From her very first breath, something was different. Her eyes seemed too knowing, her presence too vast. Even as a baby, people whispered of a strange stillness in her, an eerie sense of watching, as if she were not discovering the world for the first time, but remembering it from long ago. They say some souls are old, but Blavatsky's soul didn't just feel old, it felt eternal. Her mother, Helena Andreevna, was a writer herself, a woman ahead of her time with a rebellious intellect and a fragile body. She died when Helena was only 11, but before leaving this world, she wrote of her daughter with both awe and fear. She described her as unpredictable, powerful, almost unearthly, a child of moods and tempests, a being that didn't quite belong. Helena grew up surrounded by books, spirits, and shadows. She claimed to see beings no one else could see. She would speak of glowing figures that appeared in her room at night, whispering truths in languages she had never studied. She would fall into trances, know things she shouldn't know, predict events that would later unfold. To the family, it was terrifying. To the priests, it was heresy. To Helena, it was simply life. She would later reveal that from a young age, she had been in contact with a mysterious presence she called Master Moria, a tall, dark figure with piercing eyes, who would appear to her in dreams, visions, and even in waking moments. He would guide her, challenge her, prepare her, not with gentleness but with fire, not with promises but with presence. She didn't ask for this connection. It was there, uninvited, inevitable. But imagine the isolation, the burden of seeing what no one else sees, the constant pressure to hide, to perform, to pretend. By the time she was a teenager, Helena was already burning with questions. Why did she feel like a stranger in her own family, her own country, her own skin? Why did religious teachings feel incomplete, hollow, contradictory? Why did the world worship the surface, while she could sense the depths just beneath? And so she rebelled, not with petty defiance, but with a soul-level refusal to conform. At 17, she married Nikifor Blavatsky, a man nearly twice her age, not out of love but out of necessity. It was the only way she could escape the suffocating walls of aristocratic life. Within months, she ran, alone, no money, no protection, just a relentless drive to follow an invisible thread pulling her across the world. Most women of her time never left their province. Helena would soon circle the globe, not once but many times, guided not by maps but by a deep intuitive compass that pulled her towards sacred sites, ancient ruins, hidden teachings. But even before the travels began, there were signs. She would spend hours alone in forests, listening to the wind as if it spoke in forgotten syllables. Animals responded to her presence. Children either adored her or avoided her entirely. Elders in her village whispered that she was marked, not cursed but chosen. And always, there was the fire. Blavatsky would often speak of an inner flame that never left her, a force in her chest, a burning behind her eyes. It gave her energy, vision, insight, but also pain, alienation, restlessness. It would not let her rest in the shallows of life, and so she dove into the depths. She studied ancient languages, symbols, myths. She read the Bhagavad Gita, the Zohar, the Upanishads, the Corpus Hermeticum, not as literature, but as maps back to a truth she could feel in her bones. She practiced techniques that most people wouldn't hear about for another 100 years. Breathwork, trance, visualization, astral projection, not from books, but from memory. Because this is what most people don't understand about Helena Blavatsky. She wasn't learning the mysteries, she was remembering them. And that is why her presence was so unsettling, because she didn't approach spirituality as an outsider seeking entrance. She moved like someone who had already been inside the temple and had returned to remind us of what we left behind. As a young adult, she began to find teachers in Cairo, in Paris, in London, in India. But more often, she found herself in contact with teachers not of this world. She spoke of the Mahatmas, also known as the Great White Brotherhood, not as myths, but as real beings of light and wisdom who guided the evolution of humanity from behind the veil. She insisted that they were not gods or spirits, but advanced souls, once human, now residing in higher planes of consciousness, still in contact with those ready to serve a higher purpose. And they had chosen her, not because she was pure, not because she was obedient, but because she was unstoppable, because she would not dilute the truth to make it more palatable, because she would not serve power, because she would carry the burden of ridicule, exile, and defamation if it meant planting a seed in the collective soul of humanity. Even before she was 25, Helena had already broken nearly every rule set for women in her time, intellectually, spiritually, socially, and she would only go further. But we must pause here and ask ourselves something deeper. What makes a soul like hers incarnate? What does it mean when a child is born into a world that cannot understand her? Is it madness, genius, or something more ancient? A karmic return, a sacred assignment, a being sent not to blend in, but to remind. Blavatsky's early life was not glamorous. It was lonely, disorienting, chaotic, but it was also rich with initiation, not through temples and robes, but through heartbreak, rejection, vision, and exile. She would later write that suffering is often the first initiation, that only through being torn from comfort can a soul remember its strength, that only through being rejected by the world can we remember who we are beyond it. And if that's true, then her life makes perfect sense. Because before she was a teacher, she was a seeker. Before she was a revealer of mysteries, she was a mystery herself. And before she wrote a single page, she lived the kind of truth that books can only point to. She was born different, because she was born awake. And the world does not like those who awaken before the others. In the next chapter, we will follow her beyond the borders of home and convention, into deserts, temples, secret brotherhoods, and invisible realms, where she would begin to receive the teachings that would later become the foundation of her legacy. But first, ask yourself, have you ever felt like you were born different? Not better, not broken, but other. Have you ever felt like this world wasn't your first? Like you're walking among the sleepwalkers carrying a message you don't fully understand but cannot deny? Then perhaps, like Helena, you're not lost. You're just remembering, and you're not alone. It is one thing to study the mysteries. It is another thing entirely to be called by them. Helena Blavatsky was not content with reading about truth. She wanted to touch it, live it, risk everything for it. And the world, as if sensing the fire in her, opened invisible doors. She once said, "When the student is ready, the teacher appears." But what she never warned us is that sometimes the teacher does not come in robes of silk or sit in golden temples. Sometimes the teacher appears as a shadow in the desert, a flash of eyes in a dream, a stranger in the street who says one sentence and disappears. Sometimes, the teacher is not from this world at all. According to Blavatsky, the world we see is only a fraction of reality. Beneath the surface of human civilization exists a network of conscious intelligences, adepts, initiates, watchers, souls who have transcended the ordinary cycles of reincarnation and now dwell in planes of higher vibration. They are not gods. They are not aliens. They are not fantasies. They are the hidden masters. Blavatsky called them the Mahatmas, Sanskrit for great souls. Others have called them the Great White Brotherhood, the some elder race, or simply the inner government of the world. These masters, she claimed, are the keepers of humanity's spiritual evolution. They guide, protect, and sometimes intervene, but only when the soul is ready, only when the call is real. They do not seek followers. They test seekers, ruthlessly, patiently, precisely, and she passed their tests. Blavatsky's travels were not random. She followed an inner map that led her across the globe, from the tombs of Egypt to the mountains of Tibet. In India, she crossed paths with yogis who did not eat, did not speak, and yet radiated a presence that pierced the veil of the ordinary. In Nepal and Ladakh, she encountered lamas and monks who spoke of ages before time, of cycles of human evolution far older than any Western historian dared imagine. But it was in Tibet, she said, that she met her master in the flesh. He was tall, dark-skinned, eyes like black diamonds. His name was Moria, and from the moment she saw him, she recognized him, not from this life, but from before. He had appeared to her in visions since she was a child. Now he stood before her, real, silent, watching. He did not welcome her. He tested her. Blavatsky spoke of long periods of silence, of initiations that pushed her to the edge of sanity, of illnesses that felt like spiritual surgeries, of being stripped of everything she thought she knew until only presence remained. And then, the teachings began. What she received from the Mahatmas was not a new religion. It was a cosmic map, one that connected the fragments of all ancient wisdoms into a single coherent whole, a science of the soul, a metaphysics of the unseen, a language of vibration, karma, and spiritual law. The masters taught her of the 7 rays, energetic forces that shape human destiny, Havisur, the planetary logos, beings who inhabit and govern worlds, of root races, evolutionary stages of human consciousness across epochs so vast they make the concept of history feel like a child's toy. They revealed that humanity is not alone, that other beings, other civilizations, and both physical and etheric, share this multiverse. Some help, some hinder, all are part of the same great school. They explain the law of cycles, how civilizations rise and fall in waves of awakening and forgetting, how Lemuria and Atlantis were real, not as myths, but as echoes of previous human experiments, how every age has its guardians, and every seeker must face their own inner Atlantean fall before they can rise. And they warned her that the world was not ready for all this, that truth, when revealed too quickly, becomes a weapon in the hands of the unprepared, that the ego, when inflated by partial knowledge, creates more destruction than ignorance ever could. But Blavatsky insisted. She believed it was time, that humanity stood on the edge of a new spiritual age, that the veil was thinning and the souls were stirring, that the teachings, even if distorted, attacked, and misused, needed to be spoken. The Mahatmas agreed, but with conditions. She would not be protected. She would be ridiculed. She would suffer. And through that suffering, she would burn away what was false, until only the message remained. This is what most people miss when they speak of secret societies and occult orders. They imagine conspiracy, control, elitism. But true esoteric brotherhoods are not about power over others. They are about mastery over the self. They are not clubs for chosen ones. They are crucibles for the broken ones who still dare to remember. Blavatsky never claimed perfection. She made mistakes. She exaggerated at times. She was defensive, fiery, impatient, but she never sold out the teachings. She carried them like fire in her bones, even when it nearly destroyed her body, her reputation, her sanity, and the masters continued to guide her, sometimes through direct messages, sometimes through silence. She published their letters. She shared their wisdom. She endured the backlash, because what she was transmitting wasn't information. It was a frequency, a signal that once heard cannot be unheard, a call that reaches across lifetimes, and perhaps if you're still listening, it has reached you too. You see, the masters do not speak to the mind. They awaken something deeper, the memory in your blood, the echo in your dreams, the pulse in your spine when you hear a truth that no one taught you, but you've always known. And when that awakens, the path begins. In the next chapter, we will see how Blavatsky took these teachings and dared to make them public, how she founded the Theosophical Society, not as a religion, but as a beacon for those seeking the ancient light. But first, ask yourself, what if the masters are real? Not out there, not in the Himalayas, but right here, watching, waiting, whispering, not for obedience, but for readiness. Are you ready? There comes a moment when the inner fire must find outer form, when vision demands structure, when revelation must become revolution. For Helena Blavatsky, that moment arrived in 1875, after years of travel, initiation, and invisible work, after countless tests from the Mahatmas and a lifetime of being the outsider. It was time to give the teachings a body, not a temple made of stone, but a living vehicle that could move through time, a sacred current wrapped in organization, a new voice for the ancient wisdom. And so the Theosophical Society was born. It was not a religion. It had no dogma. It did not seek converts. It was something older, stranger, and more dangerous. A spiritual magnet, a portal, a point of contact for souls waking up in a world still addicted to sleep. The word Theosophy means divine wisdom, not as belief, but as lived experience, not as scripture, but as awakening. And the Society's mission was clear: to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood, to study ancient and modern religions, sciences, and philosophies, to investigate the hidden laws of nature and the latent powers in humanity. In other words, to remember. Blavatsky did not found it alone. She was joined by Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, a former Civil War veteran and a man of fierce integrity, and William Quan Judge, a quiet yet brilliant occultist. Together they launched the Society in New York City, of all places, far from the Himalayas, the temples, and the ancient world. Why New York? Because the New World needed the oldest truths, because the heart of modern materialism needed to be cracked open by something eternal, because the Mahatmas had chosen it. From the beginning, the Society attracted the strange and the sincere, artists, scientists, spiritualists, skeptics, mystics, rebels, people who felt that religion had failed, science had narrowed the soul, and society had lost its spirit. They came not to be told what to believe, but to learn how to see. Blavatsky became both oracle and lightning rod. She gave public lectures, wrote endless articles, answered letters from all over the world. Her language was fierce, poetic, unapologetic. She would quote from the Upanishads one moment, then tear apart a narrow-minded theologian the next. She challenged spiritual fads and empty rituals, exposing false gurus with surgical precision. She reminded people that the divine is not in holy books or polished temples. It is in silence, in service, in the burning heart of direct experience. The Society grew. Branches opened in London, Paris, India, Sri Lanka, Australia. In a few short years, it became a global movement, but not in the way movements are usually measured. Its true growth was underground, energetic, vibrational. It was planting seeds in souls, seeds that would sprout decades, even lifetimes later. And India called her back. In 1879, Blavatsky and Olcott moved the headquarters of the Society to Adyar in southern India. There, on the banks of the Adyar River, beneath banyan trees that had witnessed civilizations rise and fall, they built not just offices, but a sanctuary. Adyar was more than a location. It was a vibration, a bridge between the seen and unseen, a meeting place for East and West. ancient and modern, inner and outer. Blavatsky believed that India held the key to humanity's spiritual future, not because of its exoticism, but because of its memory. She said the wisdom of the rishis, the teachings of the Vedas, the disciplines of yoga and dharma, all of it came from the same stream the Mahatmas were now trying to reopen. But it wasn't just India that awakened. In Sri Lanka, Blavatsky and Olcott became the first Westerners to formally convert to Buddhism, not as a rejection of Christianity, but as a symbolic gesture of solidarity with the East. They were received as heroes, not because they brought something new, but because they came to listen. They honored what the West had long dismissed. They bowed not to power, but to wisdom. This was radical, because in the 1800s, colonialism was in full force. The West viewed Eastern traditions as inferior, primitive, irrelevant. But the Theosophical Society flipped the mirror. It declared that the East had preserved truths the West had long forgotten. That true evolution was spiritual, not technological. That civilization without soul is just a machine eating itself. And for saying this, Blavatsky was once again attacked by journalists, by scientists, by religious leaders. They called her a charlatan, a plagiarist, a manipulator. They said she forged letters from the Mahatmas, that she fabricated miracles, that she was mentally unstable. But the attacks only spread her name further, and beneath the surface, the real work continued, because the society was never about Blavatsky. It was about the current. Theosophy was not just a teaching, it was a transmission. It spoke of 7 planes of existence, of the astral and causal bodies, of karmic law, reincarnation, initiation, and the evolution of consciousness. It drew from every tradition, Vedic, Hermetic, Gnostic, Christian mysticism, Sufism, Kabbalah, Taoism, but pointed to a single flame behind all names. And it said, "You are not separate, you are not powerless, you are not unworthy. You are divine consciousness wrapped in illusion waiting to awaken." This was not belief, it was a call, and those who heard it never heard silence the same way again. But the society also warned of the shadow, that with awakening comes responsibility, that with knowledge comes the ego's temptation to dominate, that every light attracts both seekers and pretenders. Blavatsky herself warned that spiritual development without ethical foundation leads to ruin, that psychic powers mean nothing without purity of motive, that the path of initiation is lined not with roses but with mirrors, and what you see in them can either liberate you or destroy you. The Theosophical Society was a living paradox, open to all, yet understood by few, global yet deeply personal, revered by some, reviled by others. It was not a destination, it was a crossroads, and to stand at that crossroads meant making a choice, to continue sleepwalking through life, or to step into the flame. In the next chapter, we will dive into the books that lit that flame, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, texts that did not merely inform, but initiated, books so dense with power that even now, a century later, they are still opening portals in the minds and souls of those brave enough to read them. But first, take a moment to ask yourself, what would it mean for your life, right now, if you remembered that there is no separation? What would change if you knew that the same force that breathed galaxies into existence also breathes through you? This is what Theosophy offered. Not answers, but a return to the question that started it all. Who and what are you really? And are you ready to remember? There are books that inform, books that inspire, books that entertain, and then there are books that initiate, books that burn through the page and strike something ancient in your bones, books that are not read, but survived. Helena Blavatsky wrote 2 such books, and the world has never been the same. The first was published in 1877. Its title alone sent tremors through the spiritual and academic world. Isis Unveiled. It was not a gentle invitation to Eastern wisdom. It was a cosmic sledgehammer, a declaration of war on ignorance, religious, scientific, and spiritual. In over 2,300 pages, Blavatsky dismantled the false foundations of theology and materialism alike. She traced the origins of all religions back to a common root. She revealed the esoteric meaning hidden within myth, symbol, and scripture, and she insisted that modern science, despite all its advances, was blind without spiritual insight. Isis, the veiled goddess of ancient Egypt, became the metaphor, and Blavatsky dared to lift that veil. But make no mistake, this was not some vague spiritual poetry. It was fire, dense, merciless, provocative. She exposed the inconsistencies in Christian doctrine. She mocked scientists who dismissed the soul. She revealed parallels between Eastern and Western mysteries that few had ever seen. She claimed that the ancient wisdom of the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, the Vedic rishis, the Kabbalists, all pointed to one universal truth: that spirit precedes matter, that consciousness is the root of reality, and that humanity is far older, deeper, and more sacred than the modern mind dares to admit. The response? Outrage. Religious institutions branded her blasphemous. Scientists called her delusional. Publishers hesitated to print her next work, fearing public backlash. And still, she wrote. In 1888, 11 years later, came her true masterpiece, the book that would solidify her legacy and place her squarely in the crosshairs of history. The Secret Doctrine. Not a sequel, not a continuation, but a revelation. Where Isis Unveiled had been a challenge, The Secret Doctrine was a portal. Blavatsky claimed she wrote it under the guidance, and sometimes direct transmission, of the Mahatmas. She claimed it was based on the ancient book of Jian, a Tibetan manuscript said to predate all known scriptures, passed down through oral initiation and preserved by the masters. And what it contained was not meant for the faint of heart. The Secret Doctrine was structured in 2 volumes. Volume 1, Cosmogenesis, the origin of the universe. Volume 2, Anthropogenesis, the origin of humanity. But these were not just origin stories. They were deconstructions of everything we think we know about time, space, life, and death. She described the universe as an endless cycle of expansion and contraction, a breath of the absolute. She wrote of planes of existence, root races, planetary chains, cosmic hierarchies. She spoke of beings who evolve across worlds, of consciousness as a field that shapes matter, of karma not as punishment, but as sacred balance. She said humanity did not begin in caves, but in the stars, that the fall of man was not a sin but a descent into matter, necessary for the soul's eventual return to source, that what we call evolution is not random mutation, but the soul unfolding itself through form. And she warned that forgetting this is not just ignorance, it is suffering. The Secret Doctrine was not meant to be easy. Its language is layered, symbolic, rhythmic. Some pages feel like riddles, others like chants. Others still like spells that unlock if you sit with them long enough. Blavatsky insisted this was intentional. She said the book was not meant to be read, but contemplated, that it would speak differently to each soul, depending on their level of inner readiness, that it was less a book and more an initiator. And indeed, many who read it report strange effects. Dreams become more vivid, synchronicities intensify, a sense of déjà vu stirs, symbols begin to glow with meaning, time bends, the veil thins. Some give up, calling it nonsense. Others are never the same again. But why is this knowledge so threatening? Why did the world react not just with skepticism, but with violence, mockery, slander? Because if even one chapter of the Secret Doctrine is true, the entire narrative of modern civilization begins to unravel. It would mean that the soul is real and eternal, that death is not the end, but a return, that consciousness is not a product of the brain, but the source of creation itself, that we are not the peak of evolution, but one step in a much vaster journey, and that hidden among us are those who remember, who have walked this earth in other forms, who carry the codes of Atlantean memory, who came not to escape the world, but to awaken it. This is the danger of Blavatsky's books. They do not give you answers. They dissolve the questions. They don't hand you truth. They make you thirst for it. And that thirst, once awakened, can never be quenched by ordinary life again. Even her enemies admitted something unsettling, that her books were unlike anything ever written, that they drew from sources no scholar could trace, that they seemed to come from somewhere else. But maybe they didn't come from somewhere else. Maybe they came through her, because Blavatsky never claimed authorship in the traditional sense. She was the scribe, the mouthpiece, the lightning rod, and the storm that spoke through her is still speaking to those who have ears to hear. In the next chapter, we will explore how the world responded, not just with fascination, but with fear. We'll see how accusations of fraud, madness, and manipulation tried to bury her legacy, and what those attacks reveal about the hidden war between awakening and suppression. But before we turn that page, take a breath, because you've just touched a current that millions have avoided. And if you feel something stirring, something you can't quite name, know this: you are not reading, you are remembering. And the books were never forbidden, they were simply waiting for you. There is a cost to remembering, especially in a world that feeds on forgetting. Helena Blavatsky was not simply dismissed. She was hunted, not with weapons but with words, with headlines, with whispers and dossiers and carefully crafted rumors. She became one of the most targeted spiritual figures of the 19th century, not because she failed to convince, but because she did, because something in her presence made people tremble, because her words struck too deep, because she refused to kneel, not before dogma, not before science, not before society. So they did what the world always does when it cannot control a woman who remembers. They called her a witch, a liar, a madwoman. But behind the headlines, something darker was at play. It began with admiration. As the Theosophical Society gained momentum, so did interest in Blavatsky. Journalists attended her lectures. Scientists wrote to her, intrigued by her claims. Religious leaders debated her ideas with passion, and often with fear. She had become a force, but the more she spoke, the more uncomfortable she made them. She spoke of ancient civilizations that predated all official timelines. She insisted that consciousness was not confined to the brain. She described astral projection, clairvoyance, reincarnation, elemental spirits, and subtle bodies, not as fantasies, but as realities. And most heretically of all, she claimed to be in contact with higher intelligences, beings not visible to the ordinary eye but far more evolved than any human authority. She was not claiming power, she was disrupting it. And so came the pushback. The most infamous attack arrived in 1884, when the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, a respected British organization investigating paranormal claims, sent investigators to examine Blavatsky's work in India. At first they were intrigued, impressed, but then a document appeared, a set of letters, supposedly written by Blavatsky to collaborators, suggesting that she had faked communications from the Mahatmas, that she had staged the miracles, that she was manipulating her followers with trickery. These letters were published, cited, spread like wildfire. The SPR declared her the greatest imposter in history. Newspapers rejoiced. Academics nodded smugly. Religious leaders felt vindicated. The damage was done. But here's what most people never hear. The so-called evidence was flimsy at best. The letters were never authenticated. Handwriting was inconsistent. Motives behind the accusations were questionable. One of the key accusers, Emma Coulomb, a former associate, had a known grudge against Blavatsky and admitted to forging documents in other cases. Years later, members of the SPR themselves would retract their original conclusion. In 1986, the organization issued a statement acknowledging that their report had been flawed and unjust. But by then, the wound had already scarred history. The label of fraud stuck, not because it was true, but because it was useful. Because if Blavatsky was a fraud, then people could go back to sleep, back to the comfort of systems that demand nothing but obedience, back to a world where spirit is a metaphor, not a force. But what if she wasn't lying? What if her crimes were not deception, but revelation? Let's consider this. In the years following the controversy, Blavatsky never backed down. She never abandoned her teachings. She never sold a retraction. She never begged for forgiveness. Instead, she wrote, "The Voice of the Silence," a mystical guide for initiates. She published The Key to Theosophy, a simplified introduction for seekers. She continued to gather students, not followers, students of truth. She became, if anything, more potent, more focused, more luminous, and those closest to her, those who knew her not as a symbol, but as a soul, never doubted her integrity. They saw her suffer, falter, burn, and still rise, because Blavatsky was not trying to build an empire. She was trying to light a fire, and that's what makes the controversy so revealing. It tells us more about the world than about her. It shows us how truth is treated when it doesn't come wrapped in politeness, how female mystics are treated differently than male philosophers, how systems react when someone points to the hidden hand behind the curtain, because if Blavatsky had written gentle affirmations, she might have been celebrated. If she had watered down the teachings, she might have been embraced. If she had asked for approval, she might have received it. But she didn't. She roared, and they tried to drown her in shame. So who was she? A liar? Then how did she predict discoveries that science would confirm decades later? A fraud? Then why did the letters from the Mahatmas contain teachings far beyond what was known at the time? A manipulator? Then why did she live in poverty, endure constant illness, and refuse every offer to commercialize her work? Or maybe she was something else, something harder to categorize, an initiate, a vessel, a soul born to break the spell. Because what frightened the world about Blavatsky wasn't that she failed, it was that she succeeded, that she reached into the darkness and pulled out light, that she gave language to what so many had only felt, that she reminded people of their own forgotten power, not through comfort, but through fire. And fire always divides. It warms, it burns, it clarifies. In the end, Blavatsky died as she lived, defiant, devoted, and deeply human. She carried wounds few could see. She lived with grief, betrayal, and spiritual fatigue, but she never let the flame die, because she knew this was never about her, it was about the work. In the next chapter, we will look at that legacy, not in books or societies, but in souls. We will explore how her teachings continue to awaken, disrupt, and transform, how they have shaped modern spirituality, and why they still matter, perhaps more than ever. But for now, ask yourself, why do we fear the ones who remember? Why do we shame the ones who speak with clarity? Why do we mock what we don't understand? Especially when it rings true. Maybe the controversy wasn't meant to end. Maybe it lives on because her story isn't finished. Because you, watching this, may be one of the reasons she came at all. There are teachings that pass through history like whispers, gentle, fleeting, eventually forgotten. Then there are those that strike the soul like lightning, not because they are loud, but because they come from a silence older than the world. Theosophy is one of those teachings, and Helena Blavatsky was the storm through which it returned, not to be worshipped, not to be followed, but to be remembered, because Theosophy was never hers. It was never anyone's. It is not a belief system, not a doctrine, not a movement. It is a memory, a vibration, a code buried in the soul, waiting for the moment when the world becomes quiet enough to hear it again. And when it is heard, it does not ask for your belief. It does not need your approval. It only asks that you remember what you once knew before the noise began. Blavatsky's teachings still matter because we have not yet awakened. We have made progress in science, in technology, in comfort, but the soul of the world is still asleep. We speak of consciousness, of healing, of awakening, but we rarely touch the roots of what those words mean. We are a world that meditates with one eye open, that chants ancient mantras while scrolling a screen, that seeks peace without silence, that wants truth without sacrifice. And in that climate, Blavatsky's voice does not fit, because she was not here to give us what we wanted. She was here to remind us of what we gave up. We gave up the memory of who we are. We gave up the vision that sees through matter. We gave up the silence that speaks louder than any prayer. We gave up the sacredness of the everyday. Her teachings call us back, not to the past, but to the eternal. She spoke of spiritual evolution not as a trend, but as a cosmic law. She spoke of reincarnation not as a poetic metaphor, but as a universal mechanism of refinement. She spoke of karma not as punishment, but as balance. She spoke of the soul not as a belief, but as the real self behind all masks. And most of all, she insisted on one dangerous truth, the one thing every system fears, the one idea that, if taken seriously, unravels religion, government, education, and even identity. She said this: you already know, not in your mind, in your soul. Everything you need to awaken is already within you. Everything sacred you seek is already yours. Everything you long for is a reflection of what you are. And the moment you realize this deeply, fully, without compromise, you become free. Not free in the way society defines freedom, but truly free. free to see through the illusions, free to walk away from the false structures, free to create not from ego, but from alignment, free to live without needing permission from anyone or anything. Blavatsky's words weren't meant to be agreed with. They were meant to shatter, to burn, to awaken. And once you awaken, nothing can ever return to how it was. That is why she still matters. Because there are millions walking through life right now who are half awake, who feel the edge of something immense but cannot name it, who feel out of place, out of time, out of context, who carry a fire inside them that does not match the world around them. Blavatsky gave that fire a language. She gave it a lineage. She said, "You are not broken. You are not alone. You are not too early. You are not imagining things. You are remembering, and the world will not understand." That is part of the path. The awakening soul will always appear mad to those still hypnotized. The seeker will always appear lost to those who have settled for comfort. She taught that we are not here to be accepted. We are here to be true, and the price of truth is everything that is false. Your masks, your stories, your certainty, your desire to fit in, your fear of being misunderstood. To follow this path is to die while alive, to dissolve, to fall into the unknown, to let go of every anchor. And yet, it is the only way to remember who you are beyond the conditioning, beyond the trauma, beyond the form. Blavatsky taught that there is no salvation outside of the self, that no priest, no prophet, no doctrine can give you what is already living inside you. That initiation is not a ritual. It is a collapse, a surrender, a fire you walk into and do not leave unchanged. That fire is still burning, because you are here, listening, feeling, stirring. You may not realize it, but your soul has been responding, not just to this video, but to the call that brought you here. Maybe it started with a strange dream, a symbol that kept appearing, a restlessness that made no sense, a silence that felt alive, a longing that no achievement could satisfy. Maybe you have always known, but no one ever gave you permission to say it out loud. Well, this is your permission. This is your sign. The teachings still matter because you matter, because the world still needs remembering, because the sacred is still buried under the noise, and because someone has to awaken first. Someone has to walk ahead. Someone has to carry the flame, while the others are still asleep. Blavatsky did it. She carried the flame across continents, across lifetimes, through betrayal, illness, ridicule, and isolation. Now that flame has reached you, and the question is not whether you are ready. The real question is whether you will answer. Because this path is not about becoming something. It is about unbecoming everything you are not, so you can finally hear the voice you have always carried, so you can remember what no one taught you, but you always knew, so you can stop waiting for the world to awaken and begin living as if it already has. That is why her teachings matter, not because they are hers, but because they are true, because they are yours, because they are now, because they are eternal. So what now? Take what moved you, not in theory, in action. Reread her words, not to understand, but to feel. Let the symbols speak. Let the silence teach. Let your dreams guide. Return to the secret doctrine, even if you only read 1 page a month. Return to Isis unveiled and sit with the mystery. Write down the sentences that burn, the ones that confuse, the ones that echo. Meditate not to escape, but to descend. Walk not to achieve, but to embody. Listen not to be told, but to remember. And when doubt comes, because it will, remember this. You are not here to believe. You are here to awaken. And awakening is not a moment. It is a path, and that path begins again, right now. Let this video be more than information. Let it be initiation. Let it be the moment you stopped seeking and started listening. Let it be the turning point you did not even know you were waiting for. Because the story of Blavatsky does not end with her death. It does not end with her books. It continues every time someone feels the ancient fire stir inside them. It continues now, in you. So take this flame, tend to it, share it, protect it, and above all, become it. And if this journey touched you, stay close. There is more. Subscribe to Mystic Atlas. Watch the next video. Follow the path through Hermes, the Emerald Tablet, the 7 Hermetic Principles, and the mystery teachings they tried to erase. Each video is not just content. It is a step, a doorway, a reminder. You are not alone. You were never alone. You were simply waiting for the right voice to say what you already knew. This was that voice. Now go and live it.